Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Leading Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. All right, folks, I have a special guest with us today, Miss Isabelle Hau. So without further ado, Isabelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sheldon, for having me. So exciting to be on this podcast with you.
The pleasure is all mine. I'm so excited to have you on. But before we get into today's topic, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Of course. So I currently work at Stanford University, where I am the executive director of this amazing initiative called the Stanford Accelerator for Learning, where we are bridging innovation and research, given all the gaps that currently exist between those two worlds and the need to connect them better. But I'm also the author of a new book called Love to Learn that just came out, focused on my area of expertise and passion, the early years, and the need to think a lot more about relationships.
All right. Well, I'm excited. So, folks, the links in the show notes. Make sure you grab a copy of the book. And remind us, what's the name of the book?
Love to Learn. And I love the title, Sheldon, because it has two different meanings. It has actually a play on words.
Tell us more.
Yeah, so love to learn, because we need love. We need relationships to be able to be in a position to learn. Love needs to come before a child is able to be in a position to learn. But also the second meaning is that we are in a society where there is, as we all know, more and more automation, more and more AI, and things that are going to change our work so meaningfully. So we also need to be able to be in a position to love to learn and reinvent ourselves for future jobs, for future careers that we will all have.
Okay. All right. So let's touch on this love to learn, because I guess you could say, like you said, play on words. I mean, we could look at it in various capacities. I know a lot of times people that enter into education, they're not necessarily entering into education to become rich, right? Because we know that teaching is, I mean, I guess maybe there's some folks out there that are millionaires, but when it comes to education, a lot of us are coming in because of the service side of things. However, we are often pushed for academics, GPAs and IQs and things like that. But you talk about we need to go beyond that. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on that piece.
Sheldon, I could not agree with everything you said. So every single educator I've ever met, and I'm interacting with thousands of them all the time at Stanford and beyond, they all want one thing. They have all joined this profession to be relational driven. This is what they love doing. They love spending time with humans, making little ones or older ones learn and thrive. This is what they want to do. And as an educator myself, this is what I aspire to be when I teach. However, a lot of our systems are such that we have so many things in the way of doing, class size being one of them. If you have large class sizes, it's very difficult to provide individual attention to one little one or smaller groups of children. But also administrative tasks often get in the way of relationships, and time in the day is not enough to do everything that we want to do and spend time on what educators want to do, which is more time on the relational aspect.
So what I'm hearing is time could be a factor or a big challenge that we're facing as well. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, time is certainly one, but I would also say our learning environments, including our schools, have not prioritized relationships. So we know that relationships is one of the critical factors of brain development, of learning. We all know this. I'm not saying anything that any of your listeners would not know here. However, we have to acknowledge that our systems are not prioritizing relationships. So even within a school environment, what if we were to rethink schools and make them relational hubs? What would it look like? What if we were to invite parents and communities to be more engaged with little ones? What if we had also maybe pediatricians and medical staff, if they are different specialists with a young child involved in that school environment? Anyway, schools are not set up around relationships, but what if we were to reimagine them to be that way?
Okay, you said relationship hubs, and I'm trying to go there. All right, so I think it's a good conversation to have as far as what if we have relationship hubs. What
Yeah.
does that look like? Because I could hear some folks saying, yeah, but if we put too much emphasis on relationships, then how are they going to get those grades or the skills that they need, academic skills that they might need in order to go beyond high school or wherever they want to go to their next stage? So tell us a little bit more about what does a relationship hub look like?
Yeah, let me speak about one aspect, which is play. So
Okay.
for many people, play is almost like against all these academic outcomes. But now we have enough evidence that actually play is learning. And when I see some states having to enact laws, such as Georgia, that just passed a law for having a minimum time of recess of 20 minutes a day. I mean, we're speaking about 20 minutes a day of recess for pre-K5 children as mandated now by law, which means that for a lot of schools, it's probably less than 20 minutes a day of recess time. Our children are not playing, and play is learning based on lots of research and evidence. I'm not suggesting that it should be only play, and that playful learning should be also guided through the curriculum. So it's not only recess. I'm not suggesting that school should become 100% recess, but certainly we have enough evidence that, number one, play is learning, and number two, that play drives peer relationships, and three, that being pro-social is one of the most predictive driver of lifelong success.
Okay, so let's touch on that, because when I hear relationship hub, my thought went to teacher to student relationships. But what I'm hearing from the recess side of things, it might be more the peer relationships that we're building. Or is there a both and, or like what's make sure I'm clear on that part?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying, because I went multiple aspects of relationships. And that's actually what I'm decomposing it in the book into 4 different circles of relationships and explaining how each one of those circles is necessary for a child to learn and thrive. So there's a first circle that's a family. So where, parents, if they are parents, or other family members, siblings, grandparents, aunties, and so forth. Okay, so the core family. Then there is a second circle that's the educators and the teachers in that children's lives. It could be also caregivers if it's in the very early years. And then there is a third circle that's a peer, so the friends, the little friends around a child. And then a last circle that's a community at large. So it could be a faith leader, it could be a coach, it could be other people other adults in the community at large.
Okay, so I heard family first, right? So the families could be siblings, parents, guardians, things like that. Then the teachers or the caregivers that are providing that support for the student, and then their peer relationships would be another piece, and then finally the community aspect. So that could be their local, like you said, pastor or minister, something like that, if they're affiliated with a religious group, or maybe could be a club or volunteer, things like that. Now, does this look differently at the age level? Because you mentioned it could be a caregiver / teacher. So maybe for our pre-K folks, it could be the same 4 circles, but maybe it looks a little differently versus a high schooler who's in the 12th grade. It might look differently as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. So obviously those relationships evolve very naturally, very, very developmentally appropriate, of course. What the science tells us, Sheldon, is that at least one adult nurturing, safe, caring relationship can make a huge difference in a child's life. Okay. But we also know from really interesting research from the Search Institute that a child, especially in middle school, high school years, which is what they have looked at, the more strong relationships a child has, the better a child is in terms of learning outcomes, social, emotional learning, and so forth. So one matters, but the more a child has, the more of those strong connections across all these different circles, the better it is. And if I may add one more theme that's very, very dear to mine is the earlier, the better. So at any age, any one of us can develop those trusted relationships. We can all become an amazing parent, an amazing teacher, even though we may have had a tough early childhood education. It is very helpful if a child has had that trusted, nurturing, safe relationship in the early years. That's also what the science tells us.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot about that. And it wasn't too long ago, I had Randy Albertson was on my show, and she and I were talking about attachment theory and the value of attachment theory early on for our young children, and how that can set the tone. So I can kind of see how the attachment theory and then the relationships can kind of connect with each other.
Deeply connected. Yeah, there are several concepts that are deeply connected in my mind, but in science as well. The concept of attachment. Another word that people use very often is bonding. Another one that's more about the depth of a relationship or the moments in that relationship that are very special is attunement, which is a beautiful word.
What's the word? Say it again.
Attunement.
Attunement. Okay.
Yeah. So being
Tell
in
me
tune with
more.
each other, this very special moment where we feel like we are in tune with each other. So imagine a child and a parent or even two adults together. This very, very special moment of connection that we may feel when we speak to each other and when we relate to each other. So that's more like those very, very special magic moments in a relationships that then build, and those micro moments build to attachment and bonding and other emotional connections.
All right. Thank you for this. So I'm going to jump into more on the equitable side of things when it comes to those relationship hubs. And I don't know how much research you've done when it comes to the bond or the attunement or the relationships, attachment between young adolescents and individuals that they can connect with that have a lot of similar background or experiences to them. I know, like, if we look at our educational system, our educational system doesn't always reflect the student demographics that are in our classrooms. So is there any connection or research that you've done in relation to, like, as a male, I identify as a male, having those relationships with other males? Does that help or support, what's out there when it comes to those relationships, when it comes to the individuality of who I'm connecting with?
You're absolutely right, Sheldon. There is some really interesting research on the teaching profession that is quite clear at this point, that suggests that identity is very profound in terms of being able to connect to another. And so essentially a male teacher probably more able to, especially around the research that I'm thinking about has a racial component. So Black and brown male teachers being more able to connect with certain demographics. So there is a racial identity component that seems to be quite important in terms of building confidence and self-esteem in children. In the early years, which is more my area of expertise, one of the really interesting characteristics and the beauty of the early years is that the profession is actually quite diverse. So we have a lot of people of color in the early childhood workforce. Often it's female, so it's even more female than the K-12 years in terms of gender, but in terms of race, it's a very diverse early childhood workforce that's actually quite representative and much more representative than in K-12 of the student population.
So for like early childhood, are we referring to like 4 and 5 year olds? Is that the area that we're talking about?
So my interest actually starts at birth.
Birth, okay.
Yeah, simply because we start learning at birth. What I call, we are all born billionaires. We are born with billions of neurons in our brains, each one of us. Those neurons are not, they start actually connecting with each other a little bit before birth, but really what is called synaptic connections. So this process of connecting neurons with each other that allow us to learn and grow and develop as humans. That happens really and accelerates tremendously right at birth. And the first 2 to 3 years of life, that's where all these neurons are firing and connecting with each other. Most of those neural connections, if not all of those neural connections, are happening thanks to human connections. Thus, the importance of relationships in the earliest years of life.
Okay. And then the advantage also is that from birth to the early childhood area, there is more diversity when it comes to the caregiving side of things. Is that what I heard?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And this is something that, I mean, you can often, this is described as a deficit area because early childhood educators are not well compensated. There is a concern about, this is a profession that is indexing on certain racial aspects with concern regarding compensation and undercompensation. At the same time, thinking about the assets is that it is a demographic that is more representative than the K-12 teaching profession. So if we could increase compensation for that those earliest years while keeping the demographic of who owns and manages a home-based childcare, for instance, this would be fab. You see what I mean? Let's not change the people who are there, who are doing great work on the ground. It may just be a matter of thinking about other structural elements that are not working, but certainly that one is working better than in K-12. It's more representative.
That makes sense. What comes to mind with that is, like you said, the compensation is a lot different when it comes to K-12 teachers versus early childhood teachers. And then the college requirement is also probably going to be a factor with the differences between, because to be a teacher, you're going to need at least a bachelor's degree. In some states, you need a master's degree in order to get your teacher's license, which may not be the same for those who are needing to be certified at the early childhood level.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely right. The workforce requirements in early childhood vary tremendously state by state. There is a great certification called CDA for early childhood educators that a lot of states have adopted. And then there are processes for licensing of childcare providers that exist in many states. Anyway, there are different regulations that exist on workforce requirements in the system or non-system of early childhood education that we have in our US system. Yeah.
All right, let's transition because we've honed in enough that relationships are important. So whether that's some sort of bond or the relationship hubs we talked about, you explained the 4 circles, things like that. And folks, make sure you grab yourself a copy of the book so that you can really dig in deep about these different areas. But I want to transition over to strategies as far as what are some things that as educators, whether if it's maybe you can break it down from an early childhood side of things and maybe talk about it from a K-12 side of things, but what are some relationship strategies? Because we hear it so much. Oh, relationships. We hear all that stuff. What are some things that you would suggest when it comes to building and harnessing those relationship hubs or just relationships in general?
Yeah, let me speak for a moment about parents first and educators, if that's okay. So on parents, there is one recommendation that's top of mind, which is related to technology. So technology is in all our lives, and it's sometimes helpful and sometimes not. The really interesting fact is that each one of us, including me, and maybe including you, Sheldon, I don't know, but certainly me, I'm checking my phone 144 times a day. And that's the average American is checking their phone or their device 144 times a day. So what it means in concrete terms, if you are a parent or a guardian of a young child, is that you have an opportunity to be interrupted a lot. And so here is my strong recommendation is to really pay attention to those interruptions and ideally keep some really technology-free times where child senses that he or she is your priority as a parent, whether it's around dinner, whether it's around bedtime, bath time, all these times where ideally child feels like your focus is only on them and not on this electronic device. I'm not suggesting that we eliminate electronic devices from our life. This is not possible either. This is such a critical element for us to connect and to work and so forth. But really what is critical and what science shows us is that if a child sees us as parents or adults being interrupted by those devices, they get the sense that they are no longer seen by their parents. So there are some profound effects and negative effects, if I may say, about the relationships between the child and the parent. There are also other imitation effects and other negative effects that also incur. But certainly the main message being to the child that frankly they are not as important as a device. So being very conscious of that. And it's really straightforward, just ensuring that there are moments in that precious weekend time or after school time or before school time, if the child is enrolled in school, where that are prioritized for play or reading or other activities.
So that seems like a relatively simple task.
Simple.
That we can do, that we don't always think about, but it's very important.
Sheldon, is very simple. It is very simple. Yet again, all of us, we are inundated by these notifications, whether they are text or messages from, all of us. Social media is doing a great job at getting us onto those platforms and staying on those platforms. Yeah, and engaging on those platforms at the expense of human connections, and in particular here, parent-child connections or guardian-child connection.
Yep.
On the educator side, this is, you're absolutely right, Sheldon, this is not a new theme at all. This concept of relationships, everyone knows it. This is not a new theme. The reason why I wrote this book is because we have not prioritized relationships, and relationship circles have been contracting. So we speak a lot about isolation for adults. There are lots of people who are speaking about isolation for adults, but our little ones are also more and more isolated. So as teachers, we have a clear imperative in my mind to really refocus and prioritize those human relationships at a time when they are in jeopardy because families are smaller, because of technology, because of the pandemic that we all lived through that has impaired a lot of our connections in many ways. And then parents also being themselves more and more, or adults being more and more isolated. And so that has implications for young children seeing less and less adults, grandparents also living more and more further away, all these societal factors that lead to social circles around young children contracting.
This is good. All right, give us one more for student-to-student relationships. What are some things that suggest that you have?
Play.
Recess.
If you embed play within the curriculum, it could also be small group instructions, small group activities. Also, one of the areas in the early years that has meaningful, also interesting, positive research is mixing age groups, which we don't do very often in our systems, in our education system, but seem to have a lot of benefits. So near peer teaching is very effective across age groups, certainly in the early years, but also there is some really interesting research in middle school and high school, and even college years, actually. If a college student helps, for example, a high schooler, very effective type of activity. So near peer teaching is a really interesting concept. And how can we do this more in a system that's very segregated by age group? Each class is typically organized around age group, one age group.
Yeah. So project-based learning will be a good one as well. So collaboration, those kind of things. Outside of just recess. Recess is also one, but of course, when you get to middle and high school level, there really isn't a lot of recess happening. So there's so much more that we can do.
Yes, exactly. But I would also say, Sheldon, play is important across age groups.
Okay. How do we building that into our middle school and our high school levels as well?
And high school as well. We need play. Joy is a critical factor of learning. And love and joy, those very, very, very deep emotions, are very important to learn. And across age groups, not only in the early years. They are more obvious in the earliest years of life. But I would say let's not also forget them, even for us as adults.
Yeah. Okay. So even as adults, we should be playing as well.
Yes.
Okay. Right. I'm gonna pitch this to my boss next time to let us have a full day of play with me and the staff. So we'll figure that out. So now I have the research to support the benefits behind that as well.
Exactly. And I just wrote a little piece I have a newsletter on the benefits of dance, for example. And dancing has huge benefits for
Yeah.
young and for adults. So prioritizing those moments where we move, where we express love and joy are very important.
Yeah, we love karaoke at my school. That's the go-to for the teachers and staff.
Perfect.
Everybody loves to sing. So I go out there, do my thing, and then we have a good time. So okay.
Good. You get it. You get it. You're like already there.
Yeah, good times. All right. Well, I'll tell you this, Isabelle. I have learned a lot in this conversation. And folks, of course, this is only a snippet of what's to come. So make sure you grab a copy of Love to Learn. But I'd love for you to take us home with any final word of advice you want to leave with our listeners.
Yeah, final words of advice is really this need to think about relationships a lot more. So we speak a lot about personalized learning, which is good, this idea of centering on a child. But what if we were to use more the concept of relationship-driven education in addition to personalization?
Love it, love it, love it, love it. Thank you so much. So Isabelle Hau is here, author of Love to Learn, The Transformative Power of Care and Connection in Early Education. Isabelle, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I got one more. I forgot. If we got folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
So the best way to reach out to me online is through my website, isabellehau.com, as well as through my newsletter called Small Talks. I look forward to connecting with each one of you.
All right, folks. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Sheldon, for having me.